I am Joshua, 28 years old, and my parents treated me like a ghost for 15 long years just to protect a $3 million lie. Before I tell you about the exact moment I finally blew their perfect little world apart, let me know where you guys are watching from down in the comments section. It was mid-December, and the wind cutting through the streets of downtown Chicago felt like a physical slap to the face. The snow was falling in heavy, wet clumps, sticking to the collar of my wool coat, but I barely felt the cold. I was standing on the sidewalk, my boots buried in 2 inches of slush, staring through the massive plate glass window of an upscale photography studio. Inside, it looked like a snow globe of upper-class perfection. The lighting was warm, casting a golden, buttery glow over the exposed brick walls and the velvet antique sofas used as props. And there they were, my family. My mother, Victoria, was adjusting the collar of her tailored burgundy dress. Even from 50 feet away, through a sheet of thick glass, I could see the rigid, practiced angle of her posture. She was a woman who lived her entire life for the approval of people she didn't even like. Next to her was my father, Matthew. He was checking his Rolex, his jaw set in that familiar, impatient line. He wore a custom charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car. And then there was Carter, my older brother, the golden child. He was 32 but still possessed that easy, arrogant smirk of a high school quarterback who never had to face a real consequence in his life. He was laughing at something the photographer said, casually running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. They looked like a catalog ad for the American dream. Wealthy, healthy, and perfectly united. I stood in the freezing dark, watching them, and a bitter taste coated the back of my throat. For 15 years, this exact scene had played out without me. For 15 years, the Harrison family Christmas card had been mailed to hundreds of friends, business associates, and distant relatives. And for 15 years, I wasn't in a single one of them. My breath plumed in the freezing air, fogging up the glass. I wiped it away with a gloved hand, refusing to look away. I wasn't that little kid anymore. I wasn't the 18-year-old boy who used to cry in his bedroom, wondering what was so fundamentally wrong with him that his own parents didn't want him in their memories. I checked my phone. It was 6:45 p.m. I was supposed to walk through those heavy glass doors in 15 minutes. Mother had called me 3 weeks ago, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet honey that immediately set off alarm bells in my head. "Joshua, darling," she had said, as if we spoke every day and not once every 6 months. "We are doing our annual holiday portraits. We absolutely need you there this year." I had almost dropped the phone. The invitation was so unexpected, so entirely out of character, that my first instinct was to hang up. Why now? Why, after a decade and a half of treating me like an embarrassing secret, did they suddenly need my face on their expensive, glossy cardstock? I knew the answer now. I knew exactly why I was invited. I reached into the deep pocket of my coat, and my fingers brushed against the thick, hard edge of a leather-bound photo album I had brought with me. It was heavy. Heavy with 15 years of exclusion. Heavy with lies. Watching them laugh inside that warm, bright room, I felt my heart thudding against my ribs, a slow, steady drumbeat of pure adrenaline. They thought I was coming here to play my part. They thought I was finally going to fall in line, put on a fake smile, and help them secure their massive payday. They thought I was a prop. I took a deep breath, the icy air stinging my lungs. I didn't push the front door open. Instead, I stepped back from the window, pulling my collar up against the wind, and walked toward the dark, narrow alleyway that led to the studio's side entrance. It was time to show them that the ghost they created had finally come back to haunt them. But to understand how we got to this freezing alleyway, and why the stakes were worth millions of dollars, you have to understand how the erasure began. You have to go back to the morning my father looked me dead in the eye and told me I wasn't good enough to be a Harrison. It happened when I was 18. It was a Saturday morning, early November. I remember the smell of burnt toast and expensive dark roast coffee filling the kitchen. I was sitting at the granite island, nervously picking at the edges of a college brochure. Mother swept into the kitchen holding a stack of clothing swatches. "All right, boys," she announced, not looking at me but directing her gaze toward Carter, who was scrolling on his phone. The studio is booked for 2 o'clock. We are wearing navy and cream this year. Carter, wear the cashmere sweater your father bought you. I perked up. My chest felt tight with excitement. Up until that point, our family photos were just candid snapshots taken on vacations. This was our first professional, coordinated studio shoot. I had never been part of something like that. I rushed upstairs, tearing through my closet to find my best clothes. I didn't have much. I mostly bought my clothes from thrift stores because my parents always claimed money was tight when it came to my expenses, but I found a decent navy button-down shirt and ironed it twice to make sure the collar was perfectly crisp. I spent 20 minutes in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to comb my hair so it looked presentable. I just wanted to look like I belonged. When I walked downstairs, Mother and Father were putting on their coats in the foyer. Carter was already outside, warming up Father's luxury sedan. Mother stopped. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing slightly, taking in my slightly faded thrift store shirt and my worn-out dress shoes. A tight, strained smile stretched across her face. It was the smile she used when dealing with a slow cashier at the grocery store. "Oh, Joshua," she said softly. "You put on a nice shirt." "You said navy," I replied, suddenly feeling very self-conscious. "For the photos, right?" she said, adjusting her pearl earrings. "About that. You're just coming to watch today, sweetie." The words didn't compute at first. "Watch? What do you mean watch? It's a family photo." Father stepped forward. He was an imposing man, tall with broad shoulders and a face that rarely showed any warmth. He grabbed me by the upper arm, his grip hard enough to bruise, and pulled me a few steps away into the hallway. "Don't make a scene," he muttered, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The cards go out to the entire firm, Joshua. To my partners. To the country club board. They need to be perfect." "I ironed my shirt," I stammered, feeling a humiliating sting of tears prickling the corners of my eyes. "I can stand in the back." "It's not about the shirt," Father said coldly, looking at me with an expression of mild disgust. You don't photograph well with us, Joshua. You look awkward. You don't fit the aesthetic your mother wants. We can't have you ruining the composition. Now, you can either stay home, or you can come and sit quietly in the lobby. Your choice." He let go of my arm, adjusted his expensive tie, and walked out the front door. I went to the studio. I don't know why I did. Maybe a sick part of me thought they would change their minds at the last second. But they didn't. I sat on a hard wooden bench in the waiting area for 2 hours. I watched through the glass partition as the photographer positioned my mother, my father, and Carter. I watched them smile. I watched my father place a proud, loving hand on Carter's shoulder. I watched them create a beautiful, flawless family that I was not a part of. That was the first year. The Christmas card arrived in the mail a month later. "Merry Christmas from the Harrisons." The gold foil lettering read. Below it was the photo. Just the 3 of them. After that, it became the unspoken rule. My erasure was complete. When I went off to a local state college, I worked 2 brutal jobs. Flipping burgers at a greasy diner until 2 a.m. and stocking grocery shelves on the weekends, just to pay for my textbooks and a cramped dorm room. My parents told me they simply didn't have the funds to help me. They said building character was important. A month into my sophomore year, I went home to pick up some winter clothes. I walked into the kitchen and saw a bank statement sitting open on the counter. It was a joint account my father shared with Carter. The balance was 0, but the recent transactions showed massive withdrawals. I looked closer. Flights to Rome, 5-star hotels in Paris, thousands of dollars spent at luxury boutiques. When Father walked in and saw me looking at it, he didn't even flinch. I confronted him. I asked him how Carter was traveling across Europe when I was drowning in student debt. Father just poured himself a cup of coffee. "We used the college fund," he said casually. "My college fund?" My voice shook. "It was a joint fund, Joshua. Carter passed his freshman year. We felt he deserved a reward for his hard work. You chose a cheaper state school, so you didn't need it as much. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. He hadn't just drained the account. He had stolen my future to pay for my brother's vacation. The final nail in the coffin was my college graduation. I graduated with honors. I was the top of my graphic design program. I invited my parents. They showed up late, missing me walking across the stage. After the ceremony, we stood on the lawn. Carter had tagged along, complaining about the heat. Mother took out her expensive camera. She snapped 20 photos of Carter standing next to a statue on campus. She took photos of father. She took photos of the two of them together. I stood there in my cap and gown, waiting. "All right," Mother said, capping the lens. "It's dreadfully hot. Let's go get lunch." They didn't take a single picture of me. Not one. I realized then that to them, my achievements meant absolutely nothing. I was a ghost. And if I wanted to survive, I had to stop haunting their house and go build my own. So I packed my bags, moved out, and didn't look back. The next few years were a grind, but they were my grind. I poured every ounce of my frustration into my work. I started at the bottom of a mid-sized marketing firm in the city, taking the shifts nobody wanted, designing ads for local plumbers and discount mattress stores. I kept my head down, sharpened my skills, and eventually, the hard work paid off. I landed a massive promotion and a salary that finally let me breathe. I moved into a nice, airy loft apartment with huge windows. I bought a decent car. I built a life. And then I met Emma. Emma was a project manager at a firm we collaborated with. She was brilliant, funny, and possessed a quiet strength that grounded me. We connected instantly. On our third date, we were sitting in a small, dimly lit Italian restaurant, sharing a bottle of wine. She was telling me about her chaotic, loud, deeply loving family in Ohio. "What about you?" she asked, resting her chin on her hand, her warm brown eyes locking onto mine. "You never talk about your parents. Got any pictures?" I froze. The wine suddenly tasted like ash in my mouth. I looked down at my plate, tracing the edge with my thumb. "I don't have any," I said quietly. "None? Not even on your phone?" "In my family," I said, my voice tight. "I'm the one who doesn't get to be in the pictures." I braced myself for the pity, or worse, the probing questions. But Emma didn't push. She just reached across the table, placed her hand over mine, and gave it a gentle squeeze. In that simple touch, I felt more genuine affection than I had in 20 years in the Harrison household. With Emma, I wasn't invisible. Life was finally good. I was respected at work. I had a major client, a guy named Julian who ran a huge tech startup, who practically treated me like a partner. He constantly praised my vision and insisted on working only with me. For the first time, I knew my worth. Then came November. I was sitting in my living room, sketching out a logo concept, when my phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed Mother. I stared at it. We hadn't spoken in 6 months. Not since a brief, forced 5-minute phone call on my birthday. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some morbid curiosity made me swipe accept. "Joshua, darling." Her voice was shrill, buzzing with an artificial enthusiasm that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "How are you? You never call us anymore." I kept my voice flat. "I'm busy, Mother. Work is demanding." "Well, you simply must make time for family," she chided playfully. "Listen, your father and I were talking, and we are doing our annual holiday portraits next Sunday at the downtown studio. We absolutely need you there this year. It's been too long since we had the whole family together." Silence stretched on the line. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at it to make sure I was actually talking to my mother. "You want me in the Christmas photo?" I asked slowly. "Of course. You're our son. We want our handsome boy in the picture. Wear that nice charcoal suit of yours. Be there at 7. She hung up before I could ask any more questions. I sat there, the pencil snapping in my hand. 15 years. 15 years of being told I ruined the aesthetic, that I didn't fit, that I was an eyesore. And now, suddenly, I was the handsome boy they desperately needed. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. My parents didn't do anything without a calculated reason. There was an angle. I just had to find it. The next morning, I called Aunt Clara. Clara was my mother's younger sister, but they couldn't have been more different. Clara was a retired public school teacher, kind-hearted but deeply timid. She had gone through a brutal divorce and a nasty custody battle a decade ago, which had left her financially ruined. She lived in a modest duplex just a few blocks from my Grandma Amelia, my father's mother. Clara had stepped up to take care of Grandma when her health started failing, mostly because my parents couldn't be bothered. "Aunt Clara," I said when she answered. "Mom just invited me to the family photo shoot." "What's going on?" I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Then, the sound of quiet sobbing. "Clara? Are you okay? What happened?" "Oh, Joshua," she wept, her voice trembling. "It's your grandmother. She's in hospice care. The doctors say she only has a few weeks left." My stomach dropped. "What? Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Victoria forbade it," Clara choked out. "Your mother told me not to bother you. Joshua, your grandmother's estate, her inheritance, is massive. Over $3 million plus the old estate." "I don't care about the money, Clara. I care about Grandma." "I know, honey, I know. But your parents do. Grandma Amelia has been reviewing her will with her lawyer, Mr. Sterling. She noticed you haven't been in a single family photo for years. She asked your mother why you never visit her anymore." I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles turning white. "And what did my mother say?" "She lied, Joshua. She told Amelia that you turned your back on the family, that you were arrogant, obsessed with your city life, and refused to have anything to do with them or her." Clara blew her nose. "Grandma was heartbroken. She told your parents that if the family was truly broken, she was going to leave the entire inheritance to charity. Your mother panicked. She promised Grandma that it was a misunderstanding, and to prove it, she swore you'd be front and center in this year's Christmas card." A cold, dark fury began to pool in my chest. "They need me to secure the $3 million. "Yes," Clara whispered. "And Joshua, there's something else. Grandma didn't forget you. She wrote to you every month for the last 10 years. She sent letters, birthday cards, little checks. She thought you were ignoring them." "I never got a single letter," I said, my voice turning to ice. "I know. Your mother intercepted them. She kept them in a lockbox in the attic of your old house. She wanted to isolate you so you wouldn't get a cut of the estate." The silence in my apartment was deafening. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it felt like I couldn't breathe. My mother hadn't just erased me from photographs. She had actively sabotaged the only real family connection I had left, all for money. I thanked Aunt Clara and hung up the phone. I didn't cry. I was far past crying. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out the door. The ghost was going to crash the photo shoot. I knew my parents' schedule perfectly. Every Tuesday afternoon, Mother had her country club luncheon, and Father was at his law firm. The house in the suburbs would be empty. I drove out there, my jaw set, my mind racing. I parked a block away and walked to the house. I still had the spare key I'd kept on my keychain since high school, a habit I had never bothered to break. The lock clicked, and I stepped into the sterile, immaculate foyer. It smelled like lemon polish and expensive potpourri. It didn't smell like home. I didn't waste time. I went straight up the stairs, pulled the cord for the attic stairs, and climbed up into the dusty, suffocating heat. The lockbox Clara mentioned was exactly where she said it would be, shoved behind a stack of old winter coats. I used a heavy flathead screwdriver from my car to pry the cheap padlock open. Inside were stacks of envelopes, hundreds of them. My hands shook as I picked up the top one. It was addressed to me in Grandma Amelia's shaky, cursive handwriting. I tore it open. "My dearest Joshua," the letter read, "I haven't heard from you since graduation. I hope you are doing well in the city. I am so proud of you. Enclosed is a little something for groceries. Please come visit your old grandma. I miss you." There was a crisp $50 bill inside. I opened another, and another. 10 years worth of love, of reaching out, of confusion and eventual heartbreak from an old woman who thought her grandson had abandoned her. And my mother had sat on them like a dragon guarding stolen gold. I packed every single letter into a duffel bag and climbed down from the attic. But I wasn't done. I went into Father's home office. He kept meticulous records. I opened his filing cabinet and found exactly what I was looking for. The folder labeled holiday cards. Inside was a pristine copy of every single Christmas card they had sent out for the last 15 years. I took them all. For the next 3 days, I barely slept. I sat at my drafting table, not working on client projects, but working on my masterpiece. I went out and bought a beautiful, heavy, leather-bound photo album. On the first page, I placed the Christmas card from when I was 18, the one where they looked so perfect without me. Next to it, I glued a photo I had taken of myself that same year, standing in my greasy diner uniform, exhausted and alone. Below it I wrote, age 18. Excluded because I didn't photograph well. I did this for every single year. A pristine family card on the left, a reality check on the right. Me studying alone in the library. Me holding my diploma by myself. Me working late nights at the design firm. In the back half of the album, I attached all of Grandma's intercepted letters. I highlighted the dates. I included a printed timeline of exactly where I was living during those years, proving that the letters had been mailed to my parents' house, where I no longer resided. It was a weapon, a beautiful, undeniable weapon constructed from their own lies. When Sunday evening finally arrived, I put on my best charcoal suit. Emma helped me adjust my tie. She knew everything. She looked at me, her eyes fierce and supportive. "Are you ready for this?" she asked softly. "I've been ready for 15 years, I replied. I drove to the studio downtown. The snow was falling heavily, but my mind was crystal clear. I purposely arrived 30 minutes early. I knew David, the sleazy studio manager who always fawned over my parents' wealth, would be setting up in the main room. I also knew that my family always arrived exactly 20 minutes early to drink champagne in the private waiting suite. I parked my car, grabbed the heavy leather album, and walked through the snow toward the studio. This is where we catch up to the beginning. Me standing outside in the freezing slush, watching them through the glass. Watching my mother adjust her dress. Watching my father check his watch, watching Carter laugh. I gripped the album tighter, walked down the dark alleyway, and slipped quietly through the side door. The hallway was dimly lit and smelled of ozone from the camera flashes and expensive perfume. I crept down the carpeted hall toward the private waiting suite. The door was cracked open just an inch. I pressed my back against the wall and listened. The storm was about to break. Inside the waiting suite, the clinking of champagne flutes echoed sharply. "Is he actually going to show up?" It was Carter's voice. He sounded annoyed, like my mere existence was an inconvenience to his evening. "I can't believe we have to drag him into this. It ruins the whole aesthetic we've built." My mother sighed, a theatrical sound of long-suffering patience. "Calm down, Carter. He confirmed yesterday. It's just one photo shoot. We get the shots, we print the cards, we show them to Amelia's lawyer tomorrow morning, and then things go back to normal." "And by normal, you mean we can stop pretending he exists?" Carter scoffed. "The will is $3 million, Carter." My father's voice cut in, low, harsh, and utterly ruthless. "Plus the estate properties. We play nice for 1 hour. You smile, you put your arm around your brother, and we secure the bag. If we don't produce a photo proving we are a united front, that crazy old bat is going to leave it all to some wildlife sanctuary." I stopped breathing. Hearing it from Aunt Clara was one thing. Hearing it straight from my father's mouth, hearing the cold calculation of treating me like a pawn to steal a dying woman's money, sent a shockwave of pure rage through my system. "So Joshua's just a prop?" Carter asked, chuckling darkly. "A very poorly dressed prop?" My mother laughed softly. It was an ugly, cruel sound. "He's always been a prop, sweetie. He just never knew it. Honestly, David said if he doesn't show, he can just Photoshop an old picture of him into the back row." But Mr. Sterling wants recent proof. So we endure him for an hour. My chest heaved. I looked down at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore. They were steady as stone. I didn't wait another second. I didn't politely knock. I raised my foot and kicked the heavy wooden door open so hard it slammed against the drywall with a sound like a gunshot. The room went dead silent. My mother dropped her champagne flute. It shattered on the marble floor, crystalline shards scattering everywhere. Carter jumped back, spilling his drink down his expensive cashmere sweater. My father spun around, his face instantly draining of color. I stepped into the room. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't need to. The quiet, lethal calm in my voice was infinitely more terrifying. "I'm not a very good prop," I said, staring directly into my mother's terrified eyes. "Props don't usually talk back." "Joshua?" My father stammered, stepping forward, instinctively trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," I said, shifting my gaze to him. "Long enough to hear exactly how much my presence is worth to you. $3 million. That's the going rate for a son these days, Matthew." "Now, listen here," Father barked, recovering his false bravado. "You don't understand the legal complexities." "I understand everything." I cut him off, my voice slicing through the room like a razor. I looked at Carter, who was frantically dabbing at his ruined sweater. "Enjoy Europe on my college fund, Carter? Was it fun? I hope it was worth it, because it's the last free ride you're ever going to get." Carter's jaw dropped. "How do you know about that?" I ignored him and turned to my mother. She was shaking, her perfectly manicured hands clutching her pearl necklace. "And you?" I whispered, taking a step toward her. She flinched. 10 years. 10 years you stole my letters from Grandma. You let her think I hated her. You let me think nobody in this family gave a damn about me. You locked them in the attic like trash. "Joshua, please," she whimpered, her polished facade completely crumbling. She was confused. "I was protecting the family interests. You were protecting your own greed," I roared, finally letting the anger crack like a whip. "You've spent 15 years trying to erase me from this family because I didn't fit your sick plastic image. Well, congratulations. You finally succeeded, because as of right now I have no parents. I have no brother." I lifted the heavy leather album and slammed it down onto the glass coffee table. The glass didn't break, but the boom made all three of them jump. "What is that?" Father demanded, eyeing the book like it was a bomb. "That," I said, backing away toward the door, "is my Christmas card to you, and a copy is already on its way to Grandma Amelia. And to Mr. Sterling." Panic, pure, unadulterated panic, flooded their faces. "You wouldn't," Mother gasped, clutching her chest. "Smile for the camera," I said. I turned around and walked out of the suite, down the hallway, and out the front doors into the freezing night. The icy wind hit my face, but I had never felt warmer. Emma was waiting in my car by the curb. I got in, pulled her into a tight hug, and we drove away, leaving my fake family to drown in their own sinking ship. This is a moment that changed everything, when I finally regained control of my life. Thank you for your patience in getting this far. You are amazing. Please help me like the video and leave a comment with the number 1 below so I know you've been with me this far. This will not only help more people find this story, but also let me know that my experiences are meaningful to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. The fallout was immediate and it was spectacular. While I was confronting my parents at the studio, Aunt Clara was walking into the hospice care facility. I had given her an identical copy of the album 2 days prior, with strict instructions to show it to Grandma Amelia the moment I gave her the signal. As Emma drove us away from the studio, I sent Clara a single text. "Do it." According to Clara, Grandma sat in her bed, wearing her reading glasses, and went through the album page by page. She saw the 15 years of exclusion. She saw the photographs of me working in a diner while Carter was in Paris. And then, She saw the photocopies of her own letters, the ones my mother had hoarded in the attic. Clara said Grandma didn't yell. She didn't cry hysterically. She simply closed the book, took a deep, rattling breath, and asked Clara to call Mr. Sterling, her lawyer. Even on her deathbed, Grandma Amelia was a force of nature. 2 a.m. that night, my phone started ringing. The screen lit up the dark bedroom. It was Carter. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started again. I answered it, putting it on speaker so Emma could hear. "Are you insane?" Carter's voice exploded through the speaker, high-pitched and completely unhinged. He sounded like a cornered rat. "Do you know what you just did? Dad is having a meltdown. Mom is locked in the bathroom crying. Sounds like a rough night," I said calmly, leaning back against the headboard. "You ruined us, Joshua. You ruined the family." The lawyer called Dad an hour ago. Grandma is fast-tracking an emergency addendum to the will. She's cutting us out. Because of your stupid little scrapbook. "No, Carter," I corrected him, my voice dangerously low. "Because Mom stole her mail, Dad stole my college fund, and you went along with it because you're a parasite. Actions have consequences. Welcome to the real world." "You're a sociopath," he screamed. "You planned this. You set us up." "I just gave Grandma the photos you guys never wanted me in," I replied. "Good night, Carter. Lose my number." I hung up and blocked him. At 7 a.m. the next morning, my phone rang again. This time it was Father. I answered, stepping out onto my balcony with a cup of coffee. The city was waking up, and I felt lighter than I had in years. "Joshua," my father said. His voice wasn't screaming like Carter's. It was cold, calculated, and carried the heavy weight of a man trying to regain control of a negotiation he was losing badly. "Let's be rational about this." "I'm listening," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "You made your point. You're angry. I understand. Mistakes were made in the past. But what you're doing right now is vindictive, and it's destroying the legacy of this family." "What legacy, Matthew?" "The legacy of lying to an old woman for her money." He sighed, a heavy, patronizing sound. "Listen to me. Mr. Sterling is meeting with your grandmother at noon today to finalize the changes to the inheritance. If you call her right now, tell her it was a misunderstanding. Tell her you forged those letters or exaggerated the timeline." "You want me to lie to a dying woman to save your paycheck?" I asked in disbelief. "I will write you a check for $500,000 today," he countered quickly. "Tax-free. A gift. You can buy a house. You can invest it. Just call her and call off the lawyers." I actually laughed. It bubbled up from my chest, sharp and bright. 500,000. Wow, you're really desperate. It's a generous offer, Joshua. Don't let your petty grievances blind you to good business. It's not business, Dad. It's my life. And you can't buy me out of it. Not anymore. I don't want your money. I don't want anything to do with you. Do not contact me again, or I will file for a restraining order. Joshua, if you do this, I pressed end call. I blocked his number, too. I blocked my mother's number. I scrubbed them from my digital life as thoroughly as they had scrubbed me from their Christmas cards. A few days later, Aunt Clara called to tell me that Grandma wanted to see me. I drove to the hospice center alone. When I walked into her room, she looked frail, hooked up to monitors, but her eyes, the same sharp, intelligent eyes I saw in the mirror every morning, were bright. I sat next to her bed and took her thin, papery hand. "My dear Joshua," she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. "They kept you from me. I thought you didn't love me." "I never stopped loving you, Grandma," I said, my own voice cracking. "I just thought I wasn't allowed to be part of the family." She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "That family," she said fiercely, "is a rotting tree. I've cut the dead weight off. Mr. Sterling took care of it. They will not see a dime of my money, Joshua. They will not be rewarded for their cruelty." I sat with her for hours, talking about Emma, about my graphic design work, about everything she had missed. For the first time in my life, I felt the unconditional warmth of a parent figure who just wanted to listen to me speak. 3 weeks later, Grandma Amelia passed away peacefully in her sleep. Aunt Clara and I were the only ones at her bedside. My parents didn't even come to the hospital. They were too busy calling different law firms, trying to figure out how to contest a will they knew was airtight. The storm had passed. The wreckage was severe, but as I stood looking out the window of the hospital room, I realized that for the first time in 15 years, the sky was finally clear. I had survived the erasure. The days following Grandma Amelia's passing were a blur of quiet grief and sudden, absolute silence from the people who raised me. The funeral was a small, dignified affair held on a freezing Tuesday morning. The sky was the color of bruised iron, and the wind whipped off the lake, biting through my heavy wool coat. Emma stood by my side, her arm linked tightly through mine. Aunt Clara stood on my other side, holding a crumpled tissue. And that was it. My parents did not show up. Carter did not show up. Later, I found out through the family grapevine that my mother had claimed she was simply too overcome with sorrow to attend a public gathering. But the truth was far more calculating. My father had spent the morning of his own mother's funeral locked in conference rooms with junior partners at his law firm, desperately trying to map out a strategy to contest the will before it was even officially read. They knew a storm was coming, and they were trying to build a bunker. But you cannot build a bunker out of paper lies. 2 weeks after the funeral, the heavy cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. The return address was embossed in gold foil. Sterling and Associates, Attorneys at Law. It was the official summons for the reading of the last will and testament of Amelia Harrison. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Friday at their downtown office. That morning, I woke up before the alarm went off. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of my apartment. For 15 years, I had been the family outcast, the embarrassing secret, the invisible son whose salary and achievements meant absolutely nothing compared to my brother's mere existence. Today, all of that was going to end. Not with a screaming match, but with the cold, hard gavel of the law. I put on my best suit, not the cheap thrift store clothes of my teenage years, but a tailored, dark navy suit I had bought after my last big promotion at the design firm. Emma wore a sharp, elegant black dress. We drove downtown in silence. The radio was off. The tension in the car was thick enough to cut with a knife. The law firm of Sterling and Associates occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming glass skyscraper. When Emma and I stepped out of the elevator, our shoes sank into plush, charcoal gray carpeting. The receptionist, a stern-looking woman with silver hair, took our names and led us down a long hallway paneled in rich mahogany. She opened the double doors to a massive conference room. The walls were lined with leather-bound legal books, and a sprawling oak table dominated the center of the space. Large floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. Aunt Clara was already there, sitting near the corner, looking small and terrified. I walked over and kissed her cheek, taking the leather chair next to her. Emma sat on my right, and then the heavy wooden doors swung open again. My family walked in. If you didn't know the context, you would think they were arriving at a red carpet premiere. My mother wore a black designer dress with a subtle, tasteful diamond necklace. She had a sheer, black lace scarf draped over her shoulders, her version of morning attire. My father walked in with his chest puffed out, wearing a custom pinstripe suit, his face set in a mask of aggressive confidence. And Carter actually had the nerve to walk in wearing a brand new Rolex watch. It gleamed under the recessed lighting of the conference room. I knew for a fact he hadn't held a steady job in 2 years. He had bought that watch on credit, banking entirely on the massive inheritance he thought was about to hit his bank account. They stopped dead in their tracks when they saw me sitting there. My mother's perfectly glossed lips parted in shock. My father's eyes narrowed into dark, dangerous slits. Carter let out a loud, obnoxious scoff, shaking his head. "What is he doing here?" Carter demanded, turning his back to me and addressing the empty head of the table. "This is a private meeting for the immediate family." Before anyone could answer, The side door of the conference room opened. Mr. Sterling walked in. He was a man in his late 60s, tall and impeccably groomed, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a thick leather briefcase and projected an aura of absolute, undeniable authority. He did not look like a man who tolerated foolishness. "Mr. Joshua Harrison is here because I explicitly requested his presence, Carter," Mr. Sterling said, his voice deep and echoing slightly in the large room. He walked to the head of the table and set his briefcase down with a heavy thud. "Take your seats. All of you. We have a lot of ground to cover, and I do not have the patience for family squabbles in my office." My father pulled out a chair for my mother, glaring at me across the polished oak. They sat directly opposite Emma, Clara, and me. The battle lines were literally drawn across the table. Mr. Sterling opened his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents tied with a red ribbon. But that wasn't all. He reached back into the briefcase and pulled out something else. It was my leather-bound photo album. He placed it gently, almost reverently, on the center of the table. I saw my mother physically recoil, her back hitting her chair. All the color drained from my father's face. Carter stared at the book like it was a venomous snake preparing to strike. They knew exactly what it was, and seeing it sitting on an inheritance lawyer's desk broke their facade immediately. "Let us begin," Mr. Sterling said, adjusting his glasses. He untied the ribbon and opened the thick legal document. For the first 20 minutes, the room was agonizingly boring. Mr. Sterling read through the standard legal boilerplate, the revocation of all prior wills, the payment of funeral expenses, and the settling of minor debts. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner of the room sounded like a sledgehammer in the heavy silence. My father kept tapping his expensive pen against his leather portfolio. My mother kept taking tiny, nervous sips of water. Then Mr. Sterling turned a page. The rustle of the thick paper was incredibly loud. He looked up, peering over the rim of his glasses, locking eyes directly with my father. "We now move to the distribution of the primary estate and liquid assets," Mr. Sterling announced. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Carter leaned forward, his elbows on the table, a greedy, expectant smirk crawling back onto his face. He actually tapped his new Rolex watch with his index finger. "Article 4, Mr. Sterling read, his voice clear and unwavering. "To my son, Matthew Harrison, my daughter-in-law, Victoria Harrison, and my grandson, Carter Harrison." My parents sat up straighter. My mother gripped her designer purse tightly. "I leave the sum of $1 each." The silence that followed was so profound it felt like a vacuum had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. I watched the words hit them in slow motion. Carter's smirk froze, twisting into a grotesque mask of pure confusion. My mother's eyes widened to a comical degree, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "I'm sorry, what?" Carter barked, breaking the silence. $1? You misread that. Check the zeros, old man." Mr. Sterling did not flinch. He did not blink. He simply looked at Carter with an expression of profound pity. "I assure you, young man, my eyesight is perfect. The sum is exactly $1 United States dollar. This is an outrage," my father roared, slamming both his hands flat onto the oak table. He shot out of his chair, his face flushing a deep, angry purple. "This document is fraudulent." My mother was heavily medicated. She was not of sound mind when she signed this garbage. "We will contest this in probate court. I will tie this firm up in litigation for the next decade." Mr. Sterling calmly closed the folder. "Sit down, Matthew," he said, and the sheer command in his voice actually made my father hesitate. "I am not finished. And before you start threatening me with your empty lawsuits, I strongly advise you to listen to the rest of the addendum." My father slowly lowered himself back into his chair, his chest heaving, his jaw clamped so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. "Amelia anticipated your reaction," Mr. Sterling continued, turning to the next page. "She was perfectly lucid when she mandated these changes. In fact, She had me bring an independent medical examiner into the hospice room to film a sworn affidavit certifying her cognitive state. You will not win a competency challenge. Mr. Sterling then placed his hand firmly on top of my leather photo album. Furthermore, the lawyer said, his voice turning cold and precise, Amelia attached this piece of evidence directly to her will as Exhibit A. Inside are dozens of letters she wrote to her grandson, Joshua, over the course of 10 years. Letters containing monetary gifts. Letters that were intercepted, stolen, and hidden by Victoria Harrison. My mother let out a strangled gasp, burying her face in her hands. Amelia also provided bank records. Sterling continued relentlessly, proving that Matthew Harrison liquidated a joint college fund intended for Joshua, using the assets to fund luxury vacations for Carter. The legal term for this is breach of fiduciary duty. Amelia's addendum clearly states that if any of the three of you attempt to contest this will, the estate will release this album, the letters, and the financial records to the probate court, putting them into the public record. Your theft of mail and financial misappropriation will become public knowledge. It would, without a doubt, destroy your reputation at your law firm, Matthew, and it would likely lead to criminal fraud charges for Victoria. Checkmate. It was a masterclass in legal destruction. Grandma Amelia hadn't just cut them out. She had built an ironclad fortress around her decision, using their own crimes as the moat. The $1 inheritance was a standard legal tactic. By leaving them a specific sum, no matter how small, they could not claim they had simply been forgotten or accidentally omitted. They were intentionally acknowledged and intentionally dismissed. My father sank back into his chair, the aggressive energy completely draining out of his body. He looked 10 years older in a matter of seconds. The realization that his own mother had outsmarted him, outmaneuvered him, and trapped him with his own lies was breaking him in real time. Carter, however, was not smart enough to understand the trap. This is his fault, Carter shrieked, suddenly pointing a shaking finger directly at me. His face was red and blotchy, tears of pure rage pooling in his eyes. He manipulated her. He brainwashed a dying woman with his stupid little scrapbook. You stole my money, you piece of trash. Carter lunged across the table. Before he could even get halfway, I stood up. I didn't raise my fists. I didn't shout. I just stared down at him with 15 years of built-up coldness. Your money, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but it carried across the room. You have never worked a hard day in your life, Carter. Everything you wear, everything you drive, everything you are, was bought with someone else's money. For 15 years, you let them treat me like a ghost because it made you feel special. You thought I was just a prop. Well, the prop just walked off the stage. Sit down and shut up before I decide to press charges for the college fund right now. Carter froze, hovering over the table. He looked at my father for backup. But my father wouldn't even look at him. My father was staring blankly at the polished wood, totally defeated. Slowly, Carter sank back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. He started to sob. It was a pathetic, ugly sound. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, commanding the room once again. Article 5, he read. The remainder of my estate, including the liquid assets totaling roughly $3.2 million, my investment portfolios, and the deed to my primary residence, shall be divided as follows. 20% is to be placed in an irrevocable trust for my daughter, Clara, to ensure she never has to worry about her security again. Beside me, Aunt Clara let out a loud, shuddering breath. She covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face. Emma rubbed her back gently. The remaining 80% of the liquid assets, the investment portfolios, and the deed to the property, Mr. Sterling read, looking directly at me with a soft, respectful nod, are left entirely and exclusively to my grandson, Joshua Harrison, a young man who proved that true character is built in the shadows, not in the flash of a camera. I felt Emma's hand grip my thigh under the table. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just closed my eyes and took a long, deep breath. The weight of 15 years of rejection, the endless nights wondering why I wasn't enough, the crippling self-doubt. It all evaporated in that room. Grandma Amelia had seen me. She had really seen me. And her final act on this earth was to make sure the rest of the world saw me, too. "This concludes the reading," Mr. Sterling said, closing the folder and tying the red ribbon back around it. "Matthew, Victoria, Carter. The receptionist has your $1 checks. You may collect them on your way out. I expect you to vacate the premises immediately." My mother tried to stand up, but her legs gave out. She slumped against my father, weeping uncontrollably, her mascara running down her face, ruining her perfect, tailored image. My father had to physically support her weight as he dragged her out of the room. Carter followed behind them, head down, his expensive watch suddenly looking like a heavy, meaningless chain. They didn't look at me as they left. They didn't apologize. But I didn't need them to. Their silence was the greatest apology I could ever receive. Once the heavy doors clicked shut behind them, the tension finally broke. Aunt Clara threw her arms around my neck, sobbing into my shoulder. "She fixed it, Joshua," she cried. "She fixed it all." I hugged her back tightly. "Yeah, Aunt Clara, she did." Mr. Sterling walked over and handed me the leather album. "She told me to give this back to you," he said softly. "She said it belongs in a home where pictures are actually cherished." I took the album, feeling the heavy, textured leather under my fingers. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling, for everything." Emma and I walked out of the towering glass building and into the crisp Chicago afternoon. The sun had broken through the heavy iron clouds, casting a brilliant, blinding light across the city. I stopped on the sidewalk, holding Emma's hand, and looked up at the sky. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. A few months passed, and the changing of the seasons brought a profound sense of peace that I had never experienced in my entire life. Spring melted into a warm, golden summer, and the legal dust from the will completely settled. My parents never filed that lawsuit. The threat of public exposure, the threat of my father's law firm finding out he had embezzled his own son's college fund, was enough to terrify them into absolute submission. They took their $1 checks, cashed them, and vanished from my life. The grapevine in our city is remarkably efficient, especially among the upper crust my mother so desperately tried to impress. Word got out anyway. Not from me, but rumors always find a way. My father's partners at the firm slowly started edging him out of high-profile cases. The whisper network at the country club turned my mother into a social pariah. People realized that their perfect, glossy Christmas cards were nothing but a smokescreen for a deeply broken, toxic household. As for Carter, reality hit him like a freight train. Without the endless flow of my parents' cash to subsidize his lifestyle, his credit cards maxed out within 3 months. He had to sell his sports car, sell the expensive watch he wore to the lawyer's office, and move back into his childhood bedroom. The last I heard, he was working an entry-level sales job he hated, finally forced to face the exact same struggles I had faced a decade ago. I didn't rejoice in their downfall. To be honest, I hardly thought about them at all. I was too busy living the life I was finally free to build. The first thing Emma and I did was move out of my downtown loft and into Grandma Amelia's house. It was a beautiful, sprawling, mid-century modern home nestled in a quiet, tree-lined suburb. It had a massive backyard, original hardwood floors, and huge windows that let in rivers of natural light. The house was filled with Grandma's things, and spending the summer going through her belongings was a deeply healing process. In the back of her closet, tucked inside an old shoebox, I found dozens of photographs. They weren't professional studio portraits. They were candid, slightly blurry pictures she had taken with a disposable camera when I was a kid. Pictures of me covered in mud in her garden. Pictures of me blowing out the candles on my 10th birthday cake. Pictures of me asleep on her couch with her golden retriever. I was never erased from her life. She had kept my memory alive in the quietest, most loving ways. I took my favorite photo, a picture of Grandma and me sitting on the front porch, both of us laughing hysterically at some joke I couldn't even remember, and I had it blown up, restored, and placed in a beautiful, heavy oak frame. I set it right in the middle of the stone fireplace mantel in the living room. It was the centerpiece of our new home. With the inheritance, I had the financial freedom I had always dreamed of. I didn't quit my job. I loved graphic design too much. But I stopped taking the grueling, soul-crushing corporate hours. I started my own boutique agency. Julian, my VIP client, was the first one to sign a massive retainer with my new company. I was able to hire a small team, set my own hours, and focus on the creative work that actually brought me joy. I also took a portion of the money and set up a new college fund. But this one wasn't for me. It was an anonymous scholarship fund for kids in the city who had the grades but lacked the financial support from their families. I made sure no one would ever have their future stolen the way mine was. As the months rolled on, the weather turned cold again. November arrived, bringing the familiar chill of the Chicago winter. But this time, I didn't feel the dread creeping into my chest. I didn't feel the phantom anxiety of a phone call from my mother demanding I play the role of the invisible son. December came. It was time for Christmas. We hosted it at Grandma's house. For weeks, Emma and I decorated. We didn't hire a professional designer. We didn't stick to a rigid navy and cream aesthetic. We bought a massive, slightly crooked real pine tree from a local lot. We strung it with mismatched lights, colorful glass ornaments, and hideous, homemade decorations we found in boxes in the basement. It was chaotic, loud, and incredibly beautiful. On Christmas Eve, the house smelled of roasting turkey, cinnamon, and wood smoke from the fireplace. The doorbell rang, and I rushed to open it. Aunt Clara stood on the porch, bundled up in a thick coat, holding 3 massive tins of homemade cookies. She looked healthier, brighter, and 10 years younger than she had at the lawyer's office. The trust fund Grandma left her had allowed her to retire completely, pay off all her debts, and live without the crushing weight of financial anxiety. "Merry Christmas, Joshua," she beamed, pulling me into a massive hug. "Merry Christmas, Aunt Clara. Come in, it's freezing." Julian, my client turned close friend, arrived shortly after with his wife and their 2 little kids, who immediately started running circles around the living room, chasing the new rescue dog Emma and I had adopted. The house was filled with the sound of actual, genuine laughter. Not the polite, manufactured chuckles of a country club gathering, but the loud, messy joy of people who genuinely loved being around each other. Emma walked out of the kitchen, wiping flour off her cheek. She was wearing a ridiculous, oversized Christmas sweater that lit up when she walked. I looked at her, standing in the middle of the living room, surrounded by warmth, food, and people who cared about me. I walked over to her, wrapped my arms around her waist, and kissed her forehead. "You did good, Joshua," she whispered, leaning her head against my chest. "We did good," I corrected her. After dinner, when the kids were exhausted and asleep on the rug, and Aunt Clara was sipping spiked eggnog by the fire, I stood up. I walked over to the hallway closet and pulled out a heavy black bag. I set up the aluminum legs of a camera tripod right in the middle of the living room. I attached my professional DSLR camera to the mount. "What are you doing?" Aunt Clara asked, smiling over the rim of her mug. "We're taking a family photo," I said. I didn't adjust the lighting to make it look like a buttery studio. I didn't ask anyone to change their clothes. I didn't care that Emma still had a smudge of flour on her face, or that Julian was wearing a hideous reindeer tie. I set the timer for 10 seconds and hit the shutter button. "All right, everybody squeeze in," I yelled, running over and diving onto the sofa next to Emma and Clara. Julian's wife leaned over the back of the couch. Julian grabbed the dog, who tried to lick his face right as the red light on the camera started blinking rapidly. Emma threw her arms around my neck, laughing. Aunt Clara beamed, holding her mug high in the air. Click. The flash illuminated the room. I walked over to the camera and looked at the digital screen. The photo was imperfect. The lighting was slightly yellow from the fireplace. The dog was a blur of motion. My hair was messy. But as I looked at the faces in that small LCD screen, I saw something I had never seen in any of the 15 glossy, expensive, perfectly curated Christmas cards my parents had sent out. I saw truth. I saw a family. And for the first time in my life, I was right in the center of it. Going through all of this taught me a lesson that completely changed my perspective on life. We are often conditioned to believe that blood is an unbreakable bond, that we owe our loyalty, our mental health, and our very identities to the people who share our genetics. But the truth is, family is not defined by blood. It is defined by respect, reciprocity, and unconditional love. If someone continuously treats you like an option, if they erase your accomplishments, or if they only value you for what you can provide them, you have every right to walk away. Walking away from a toxic environment isn't an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you. I spent 15 years begging for a seat at a table where the food was poisoned. It was only when I built my own table that I finally learned what it meant to be full. Never let anyone make you feel like you are just a prop in their story. You are the main character of your own life. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to draw a hard boundary or build your own chosen family, I'd love to hear your perspective. What was the moment you realized you had to choose your own peace over toxic loyalty? Let me know down in the comments. Or, if you simply agree with the lessons this journey taught me, just drop the word good in the comments so I know you're with me. Thank you for listening, and remember, the best family portraits are the ones where you don't have to fake your smile.